Okay, let's unpack this. Today on the deep dive, we're exploring some really extraordinary territory.
Hmm.
We've got this whole collection of your sources, articles, research notes, video transcripts, personal stories,
Right.
and they're all putting forward this remarkable idea that there's actual physical evidence, like on the ground right now, for stories from the Bible.
That's right. And these aren't just, theoretical talks. The material we looked at claims there are real-world locations, actual artifacts,
Yeah.
that directly line up with biblical accounts. Things like the Red Sea crossing, Sodom and Gomorrah, Mount Sinai, and even some, well, frankly, astonishing claims about the Ark of the Covenant.
And our job, like always, is to kind of guide you through this stuff. We're going to pull out the most important bits, the surprising
The
details,
real nuggets.
and help you understand what these claims are actually saying straight from the sources we have.
Yeah.
We're jumping right in, covering sites from like the Dead Sea to Saudi Arabia, Jerusalem.
And one name that, well, it pops up again and again across a lot of these specific claims is Ron Wyatt.
Ah, yes, Ron Wyatt.
He's presented in this material as, like, a central figure. Claimed he discovered multiple really significant biblical sites and artifacts over decades, actually.
No, the sources they're pretty careful here. They do note that Wyatt claimed his discoveries were backed up by multiple witnesses, which they seem to think is important.
Right. They emphasize that.
But then right away, they say his claims are not universally accepted.
Mm.
And maybe more interestingly, they say they're not talked about much, even in some Christian circles where you'd think people would be interested.
Yeah, that's a key point they make. And the material itself suggests a couple of reasons why maybe there isn't this widespread discussion or, acceptance.
Okay, like what?
One idea floated is linked to this perception of a lukewarm state in modern religion.
Yeah.
Like maybe there isn't the same kind of hunger for tangible proof anymore.
Hmm.
And the other reason, maybe more direct, is this hesitancy because Ron Wyatt was a Seventh-day Adventist.
Ah,
The sources kind of imply that this connection, his denomination, makes some people just automatically dismiss or, steer clear of his findings.
and the sources, they give a really clear instruction for you, the listener, and for us too, as we look at this. Be discerning.
Absolutely.
They explicitly say we should test the spirits when looking at these claims, which means, don't just buy it because it sounds cool.
Right.
But don't just throw it out either. Approach it, critically.
It's really about looking at what the sources are presenting
Yeah,
and asking, okay, what's the claim and what evidence do they actually offer for it?
exactly. So let's dive into some of the biggest claims presented here. We'll start with maybe one of the most infamous biblical locations, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right? The story everyone knows is that these cities were just completely wiped out, fire and brimstone, because of, well, extreme wickedness.
And where do these sources say the physical proof for this is? Like, where is it?
An area near the Dead Sea,
Hmm.
described really vividly as just ash-colored land.
Okay, ash-colored land, but what's the actual evidence in the ash?
Well, this is where it gets fascinating.
Yeah.
They report finding patches of, get this, high-purity sulfur embedded in ash-covered terrain.
High purity sulfur.
Yeah, and when they say high purity, they really mean it. The sources specify 90 to almost 100% pure monoclinic white sulfur.
Monoclinic. What's the big deal about that type and purity?
Well, they make a point of contrasting it really sharply with, say, volcanic sulfur,
Okay.
which they describe as rhombic, and usually only about 40% pure. So the claim is these specific sulfur balls, this structure, you just cannot find them in any volcanic area or any mineral museum.
So not natural volcanic stuff. It had to come from somewhere else is the idea.
That's the implication, yeah. Something else happened here.
Okay, so unique sulfur, but are there actual, like, city ruins, remnants?
The sources claim yes. Within the ash, they say they see evidence of man-made structures, things like ancient houses, gates, temples, statues.
Really? How can they tell?
The descriptions focus on finding straight lines in the walls and even ziggurat-type structures at intersections.
Mm-hmm.
The argument they make is that nature just doesn't do that type of thing,
Yeah.
create those kinds of defined angular shapes in ash deposits.
So they're saying you can literally see the outlines of buildings in the ash.
No.
That's pretty wild. What about the landscape itself? Does it fit the story?
Well, the landscape is presented as definitely backing up the destruction story. The area is described as completely dead, nothing is growing here, which fits the biblical aftermath, right?
Right. Total devastation.
And they also mentioned seeing this weird swirl-like pattern on the valley walls. They suggest intense heat had melted different layers of the rock and sediment, like something incredibly hot swept through.
And it's not just Ron Wyatt saying this stuff, right? The sources mention others.
Correct. They bring up other witnesses, people like Lotan, Jake Wilson. They report finding similar sulfur balls, seeing these architectural shapes in the ash too. Lotan apparently shared this really striking story about going there and finding no parking lot or anything, no tourists, or anyone for that matter. Just empty.
Wow. At what's claimed to be such a major site.
Yeah, which leads the sources to ask point blank, why don't archaeologists look into this? It's presented as something visibly there, maybe overlooked by the mainstream for, well, reasons they don't fully spell out. Maybe the controversy, maybe the location.
Okay. And while we're near the Dead Sea, they briefly mention Lot's wife, too.
Yeah, just a quick mention. The Bible story is, she looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah burning, disobeyed God, and turned into a pillar of salt.
Right.
And the claimed physical proof mentioned is this towering salt formation right there near the Dead Sea that locals apparently call Lot's wife. Described as an eerie sight, a solemn reminder.
Okay. Yeah. From Cities Judge 2.
Yeah.
An incredible escape story. The Red Sea crossing. Iconic story, right? Israelites trapped, Pharaoh's army behind them, sea parts, they cross, army drowns.
And the sources, right off the bat, they challenge the usual picture you see. That crossing point, often shown as a shallow sea of reeds near Cairo.
Yeah.
They say, pretty bluntly actually, you can throw that map in the trash.
Okay. Strong words. So where do they say the crossing actually happened?
They pinpoint a specific spot in the Gulf of Aqaba, stretching from Nuweiba Beach, that's on the Egyptian side, across to the Saudi Arabian coast.
The Gulf of Aqaba, that's deep water, isn't it? We're talking potentially thousands of feet deep. What evidence could possibly be down there?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. Researchers claim they found ancient chariot wheels and other artifacts at the bottom.
Chariot wheels, underwater.
Yeah. They describe specific finds like 4-spoked wheels, 6-spoke wheels. Some apparently still have metal hubs in the center that were preserved by coral growing over them.
Yeah.
One really striking detail is a claim they found a gold veneer, like a thin layer of gold from a 4-spoked chariot wheel at 200 feet down.
Gold veneer. How would that survive? How are they even identifying these things through the coral?
Well, the sources mentioned using underwater metal detectors. Apparently, these detectors located metal inside the coral-covered hubs. That indicated to them it was a man-made structure, not just, a strangely shaped piece of coral or rock.
Okay, metal detectors help. But what about the seabed itself? Could a huge crowd of people, animals, chariots, could they actually cross the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba? It's not exactly flat, is it?
That's a crucial point. The sources describe a specific path across the Gulf. They say there's a shallow section right in the middle, relatively speaking, shallow, compared to the 2,000-meter depths nearby.
An underwater land bridge, almost?
Kind of. And
Right.
critically, they claim the slope going down and then back up on this path is within the criteria for wheelchairs in the U.S.
Seriously, wheelchair accessible.
That's the comparison they use. They describe this specific path as being like concrete and very, very solid if you took the water away. Suitable, they argue, for chariots and horses going at full speed, while the areas all around it are supposedly impassable mountains underwater. Fits the idea of being trapped, right?
It does fit the narrative of being hemmed in. What about the geography on land? Does that match?
Yes. The sources point to the Wadi Wadi Canyon. It leads right down to Nuweiba Beach. They say this geography perfectly matches the description in Exodus about the Israelites being entangled in the land the wilderness has shut them in.
Trapped between mountains and sea.
Exactly. And they even cite Josephus, the historian, describing the mountains around Nuweiba Beach as impassable by reason of their roughness.
Okay, so the geography seems to fit their claim. And the evidence isn't just on the Egyptian side, right? What about the Saudi side, where they would have come out?
Right. Inspections over on the Saudi Arabian coast are claimed to have found chariot parts continuing to the other side,
Like what?
including what's described as a beautiful round chariot wheel specimen with a raised center hub, a human femur bone, maybe a human rib cage, and even a horse hoof, all supposedly found on that far shore.
Are these things being brought up? Can we see them?
Well, the sources mention a legal issue there. It's apparently strictly forbidden to touch or remove any coral in the Red Sea for conservation,
Right.
But they claim this rule now prevents any artifacts covered in coral from being brought up to the surface for study.
So the core idea from these sources about the Red Sea is forget the traditional spot. Look at this specific path in the Gulf of Aqaba. It has a unique underwater terrain, and there's claimed evidence of a massive crossing chariots and all submerged right there.
That's the claim they're making, yeah. Now, Should we move from the bottom of the sea to a mountaintop? The claims about Mount Sinai.
Okay, Mount Sinai. Absolutely central to the Exodus story, isn't it? God descending in fire, the mountain smoking, shaking, the Ten Commandments given.
The Israelites camping at the base, building altars, the 12 pillars.
The whole golden calf incident, Moses striking the rock for water, that battle with the Amalekites, the oasis of Elim. So much happened there.
And again, just like the Red Sea, the sources immediately draw a distinction between the traditional location
Which is where?
in the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula, a site that apparently dates back to a claim made in the 4th century AD linked to Emperor Constantine's mother.
Okay, so relatively recent, historically speaking. Where do these sources say the real Mount Sinai is?
Northwest Saudi Arabia, specifically a mountain range called Jebel al-Lawz, and its highest peak, Jabal Maqla.
Saudi Arabia. That's quite a shift. Do they say why they think it's there?
Well, they argue this Saudi location is actually supported by older traditions. They cite Jewish, Christian, and Islamic sources, Josephus again, and even the Apostle Paul's reference to being in Arabia. Plus, they note that local people there apparently still refer to the peak as Jebel Musa, which means Mountain of Moses.
Okay, so local tradition and some older sources point there. What's the physical evidence claimed at this mountain, Jabal Maqla?
Probably the most visually striking claim is about the peak itself. The top, maybe 20–30% of the mountains outside, is supposedly blackened, described as showing signs of burnt marks.
Burnt marks, like from the fire described in the Bible.
That's exactly the claim, that it matches the description of God descending in fire and smoke.
But hang on, couldn't that just be, volcanic rock? Lots of mountains have dark rock on top.
They anticipate that. The sources specifically address the volcanic argument. They claim that volcanic rock is black, both inside and out. But the rock here, they say, is only blackened on the exterior surface. The inside is normal rock color.
Ah, so they're arguing it was burned from the outside, not formed black.
Precisely. Evidence of a surface burning event, not just its natural geology.
Okay, that's interesting. What else is claimed to be there?
Well, right at the base, there's supposedly this huge flat plain, huge in size, they say, presented as the spot where the massive Israelite camp would have been.
Could it support that many people?
They note it has streams of water and pasture land, suggesting, it could have supported a large group and their animals.
And didn't the Bible mention Moses and elders going partway up the mountain?
Yes, and the sources point to a natural plateau partway up the mountain. They claim that's the spot where Moses and the 70 elders could have gone, matching that part of the story.
What about altars? Sacrifices, that was a big part of things.
They claim extensive remains right at the base, including an altar, corrals for animals, even animal bones, a complete system for animal sacrifice, they call it, matching Exodus 24.
And the 12 pillars for the tribes.
Stones found near this altar area are claimed to be those 12 memorial stones or pillars. Ron Wyatt apparently claimed one even had some Hebrew writing on it.
Wow, okay. There's also mention of a speaking platform.
Yeah, a large platform from where Moses could have easily spoken, located just above the main altar area. It's noted for having great natural acoustics, acting like a natural amphitheater. So Moses' voice could have carried down to that huge camp below.
Makes sense. What about the golden calf, that infamous incident? Any sign of where that happened?
Another altar area was reportedly found nearby, claimed as the Golden Calf altar site. It apparently includes a main rock that shows a flat spot where the golden calf might have been placed.
A flat spot on a rock.
Yeah. And maybe more tellingly, inscriptions found on rocks nearby are claimed to look like the Egyptian false god Hathor, who was often represented by a calf.
Ah, okay. The Hathor connection. What about water? They would have needed a lot of water. For drinking, grinding up the golden calf and making people drink it, right?
Right. The sources mention a stream which forms a small lake plus nearby wells. That's presented as the water source for the camp and those specific events. There's another screen mentioned to the north as well.
And a mass graveyard? That sounds grim.
Yeah, about 4 or 5 miles north of the main site, there's an area with thousands of standing stones, like grave markers.
Thousands.
Yeah. This is claimed to be the burial site for the 3,000 people killed after the Golden Calf incident. Apparently, this area is now fenced off by the Saudi government as an archaeological site, too.
Okay. What about other specific biblical details? Like Elijah's cave or the oasis of Elim?
They point to a large cave on the side of the mountain, claimed to be Elijah's cave. It's noted as being the only large cave in this area.
Makes it a likely candidate, I suppose.
And a place shown in the sources, claimed to be Elim, Reportedly has many palm trees and exactly 12 wells. And supposedly it's still known by that name, Elim by the local Saudis.
12 wells and palm trees matches the description. One of the most visually compelling claims, though, is the Rock of Horeb, the rock Moses struck.
Oh, absolutely. The pictures are striking. It's a massive rock, split right down the middle.
Split?
Yeah, huge crack running top to bottom. And crucially, there's clear water erosion on the rocks below it, as if large amounts of water flowed out from that split. This is claimed to be the rock Moses struck at Horeb, or Rephidim, to bring water for the Israelites. It sits on a small hill, apparently visible from a distance. The sources argue it perfectly matches the biblical accounts in Exodus, Isaiah, Psalms, talking about water gushing from the rock. And its location near the claimed Mount Sinai fits too.
And there's an altar nearby.
Yes, an apparent altar structure located right beside the rock Moses struck. This is believed to be the altar Moses built after they defeated the Amalekites, the one named Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is my banner.
Any inscriptions found in the area?
They mention findings of Hebrew or Proto-Hebrew inscriptions, some interpreted as maybe saying place of rest, which could be Rephidim or possibly relating to that battle with Amalek.
There's also that really weird anecdote included about a black cloud, isn't there?
Yeah, it's fascinating. A witness reported seeing this dense black cloud touching the mountaintop, but it didn't move with the wind, it just stayed there. And they felt the ground shaking, like earthquake also shaking the ground. An 80-year-old local apparently said he'd never seen anything like it in his life. The witness described feeling divine terror, like God himself was present. It's presented as this modern, unexplained event happening right there at the claimed holy site.
That's spooky. What about getting access to these places? If all this evidence is there, why isn't it more widely studied or known?
Well, the sources mentioned the Saudi government has fenced off some of these key sites. Access is controlled, although apparently they've recently started opening them up more to tourists.
Okay.
But getting official visas for proper archaeological excavation is reportedly still very difficult. There's also a suggestion made in the sources that the region's history, particularly Islam's presence since around 610 AD, might have unintentionally preserved the area, kept it relatively undisturbed. The source uses the phrase protect himself, compared to sites in, say, Jerusalem or Egypt, which have seen constant rebuilding, digging, and disturbance over centuries.
So the core claim here is that this specific mountain range in Saudi Arabia, Jabal al-Lasjab al-Makla, fits the biblical description of Mount Sinai far better than the traditional site. And it has this whole collection of physical evidence: the burnt peak, the altar remains, the pillars, the rock, the inscriptions, the geography backing it up.
That's the argument laid out in the sources, yes. Now, should we shift gears to maybe the most debated claim of all in this material? Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark, yeah, a story everyone knows, but finding it, that's the tricky part. Our sources focus on the Darupanar site in Turkey, right?
That's the one. It's this large, boat-shaped geological formation that was spotted from the air back in 1959.
Boat-shaped, okay.
But the sources immediately dive into some points of debate or differences between the Bible and the Quran that really affect how people view this site.
Like where the Ark landed.
Exactly. The Bible, Genesis, says the Ark rested on the mountains of Ararat, plural. The Quran says it landed on Al-Judi, but doesn't specifically say mountain.
And the Darupanar site, where is that?
Yeah. It's near the traditional Mount Ararat range.
Yeah.
But some argue it's actually on a ridge called Mount Judi, about 20 miles away from the main Ararat peak. So, a bit confusing.
Okay.
Plus, the sources throw in a challenge to the traditional Ararat landing spot itself. They claim Mount Ararat, the big volcano, is actually a relatively recent geological formation.
Recent?
Yeah, geologically speaking.
Nope.
They argue it did not actually exist back at the time of Noah's Ark, making it an unlikely place for the Ark to have landed according to that timeline.
Huh. Okay, that's a big claim. What about the Ark's size? The Bible's really specific there.
Very specific. 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. The sources point out the Quran doesn't give specific measurements.
So does the Darupanar site match the biblical size?
This is a key part of the claim. The Darupanar formation measures about 518 feet long. Now, if you use the standard Hebrew cubit, 300 cubits is only about 437 feet. Doesn't match.
Right.
But the claim is, if you use the Egyptian royal cubit, which is longer, about 20.62 inches, then 300 of those cubits comes out to almost exactly 518 feet.
The Egyptian cubit, why would that be used in Genesis?
The argument presented is that Moses, traditionally seen as the author of Genesis, was raised and educated in Egypt, quote, learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians.
Yeah.
So he would have naturally used the Egyptian measurement system he knew best.
Okay, that's an interpretation. So the shape looks like a boat, and the size arguably matches if you use the specific cubit. What about evidence inside the formation or underneath it? Is it just a hill?
This is where they bring in